Just a brief table of contents here about the kinds of things we'll be covering in today's session. So we'll talk a little bit about how these new assessments are going to be different from our current assessments, and whether or not states are all going to use the same cut scores or passing scores on these tests. So how do we make decisions in Smarter Balance? How does this happen, and how do states stay engaged in that? And how is being in the Smarter Balanced Assessment going to help your school? How are teachers and school leaders involved in our work? And finally, what's the timetable, the rollout, the schedule for these new assessments? So I think we'll probably actually address a few more topics even than that, but if we can address those 6 questions, I think we're off to a good start, and I think we'll probably drill into some more details as well. This is a slide of the country, and it shows all of the states who have currently adopted the Common Core state standards. Actually it's a lot more than 40 states. The only states that are at this point outstanding are Alaska, Texas, Nebraska, Virginia, and Minnesota is in a little bit of a different color. Minnesota has adopted standards for Minnesota on English language arts side aligned to the Common Core, but their mathematics standard do remain unique to Minnesota. And I will say also that Alaska has done an awful lot of work in the adoption of standards for the state of Alaska, and their standards are just pretty darn near the Common Core state standards. As a matter of fact, if you take a side-by-side look at the 2 sets of standards, you almost need a magnifying glass to tell the difference between them. So what's exciting about this new Common Core, of course, in addition to the commonality that brings across states and the opportunity for pre-service teachers to come from different states and into a new state and be up and ready and prepared to teach our young children, is these new standards are clear, they are consistent, and they are significantly more rigorous as they are aligned to what's expected for students when they leave our high schools and pursue post-secondary careers or work in college and university. So Honor mentioned that we did receive a grant from the U.S. Department of Education, as did the other large assessment consortium, which is known as PARC. And I think below we have a number of features of that grant. So first of all, these assessments are supposed to not only signal for high school students whether or not they are ready for college and career, but also for students in grades 3 through 8, the extent to which they are making progress towards those standards. So this is not simply something for high school teachers and principals to be concerned about, because this level of rigor on these new examinations cascade down through the grades. As you go from high school down through middle school and down to elementary school, with each year building on the progress and the expectations from the previous year. So by the time you get to high school, students will be prepared for college or career. So even at the earliest grades in elementary school that we'll be assessing, in grades 3, 4, and 5, and up into grades 6 and 7 and 8, these college career readiness standards do set a new high bar for expectations for students. There will be a set of common cut scores across all of the states. So in other words, all Smarter Balanced states, all states in our consortium, will be expected to perform against the same standard, the same level of performance, regardless of what state you're in. The same holds true for PARC. And actually, PARC and Smarter Balanced are working in partnership with each other and in collaboration to align those 2 sets of performance standards, the Smarter Balanced set and the PARC set, so that regardless of what state you're in, we understand that the same level of overall expectation performance is expected. These new assessments not only are supposed to provide status measures, in other words, achievement measures like the proportion of students meeting standard, the proportion of students not meeting standard, the proportion of students advanced, and so on, but also growth information across the years. And so these new tests will be able to do things from a measurement perspective that perhaps your current state tests are not able to do, or not able to do with a level of precision that is important to have if you're going to be measuring student growth. These tests are to be valid, reliable, and fair for everybody except the 1% of the student population who do have significant cognitive disabilities. These are to be administered online. In other words, we do use the computer to administer the tests and to receive student responses. There's an expectation that we use multiple measures. And finally, we are building a system that is ready to be used in the 2014-15 school year. All of these elements that I've outlined for you here were in the grant that we responded to. So these are not made up by Smarter Balanced because we just think that's a good idea. If we were to secure the funding to develop these new assessments, we have to meet all of these criteria. And these are the same criteria that a park is being held subject to. And I think I can pause here and see if there's any questions about sort of this first introduction about where we are, what we have going on with the overall assessment system.
Yeah, we have one question here. Could you speak more about what is meant by multiple measures?
Oh, great question. Thank you, Honor. Well, you know, what is meant by that in the request for proposals that the Department of Education put forward is this notion that it would not only be selected response or multiple choice tests. So actually we have characterized that as there will be selected response items, but there will also be what we call constructed response items that do require students to produce a response. Sometimes it's a short response, like maybe a single number answer, but that's different than selecting a number. Sometimes it's a few sentences, and sometimes it's an extended piece of text or a piece of writing or a piece of comparative writing. In addition to that, we have also performance tasks in our design, and these performance tasks are a collection of questions and challenges for students around a single theme. They are more scenario-based, kind of pose real-world problems, if you will. An example we've often used is imagine that might work for, say, a middle school student. Imagine you are designing a park, and you need to find a place to put the merry-go-round on that park. You need to also put a trail through the park, and you fill the trail with pea gravel. Well, how much pea gravel do you need to buy? Here's what the trail looks like. Here's its dimensions, and so what's the volume that the trail is going to need for gravel or beauty bark or whatever you want to do. So that's a kind of example. I think you can well imagine that a number of mathematics questions could be asked around that single theme. So it draws students in and asks them to apply their mathematics in perhaps more challenging ways, getting to a little bit what we call deeper thinking, if you will, of our students than simply finding the correct answer on a multiple choice test.
One last question, thank you. Is the for the 2014-15 year, does that include formative assessment item banks?
Yes, it does. And I have a calendar a little bit later on in the slideshow that I think you'll see what those rollout dates look like. So why don't we go to just a couple of slides here about the consortium itself. These are the states that are in the Smarter Balanced Consortium, the green states. There's a total of 25 states. About 40% of the students in the country are in our consortium. 21 of those are what we call governing states. Governing states sit at the table and vote on policy matters. 4 of our states are what we call advisory states, and they are states that have not quite fully committed yet to the Smarter Balanced design. All but one of these blue states, or the advisory states, are actually right now in both consortia, both in Park and Smarter Balanced, and they're trying to decide which one that they might want to go with. Washington, there's a little star there by Washington. That's our fiscal agent. It is the state that actually received the grant from the Department of Education and is managing all of our contracts and all of our funds and all of the fiduciary responsibilities associated with the consortium. I think highlights the Bay Area of California, because WestEd, which is the regional lab on the far west coast, is actually our project manager, and they provide logistical support and project management support for the project. This is just a brief look at at what really organized us from the very beginning. A number of us who worked in states, in state assessment offices, met in 2009 and 2010 when it looked like this opportunity might become available, and asked ourselves, if we're going to have a theory of action, if we're going to design this thing, what's going to drive that theory of action? And so these 7 principles, and I won't take everybody's time reading them all aloud because they're pretty self-explanatory. These 7 principles actually guide all of our work. So as we ask our states to decide policies for the consortium, make hard choices about should we do it this way or should we do it that way, we always go back to these key principles and to our theory of action about what are we about. And it's always helpful to have a reason why you're doing things and a theory and a philosophy behind your work. And so I did want to include this in the show so that you can see the founding principles, if you will, upon which we are based. So, you know, on the left-hand side, we have the Common Core standards. It's a great thing to have. There's no question that is a wonderful opportunity for this country and for the children in the country. And off to the right, we have this laudable goal of having all of our high school students leave high school, college, and career ready. And some magic must happen in the middle there so that we get from the left to the right. And more importantly is the question, how can an assessment system have anything to do with that? I mean, you could get from the left to the right and never give a single test. But the next click, I think, is a notion founded on those principles I just showed you. And that is that we believe in Smarter Balanced that teachers and schools actually have information tools that can help improve teaching and learning, that we can assist this. As an assessment consortium, we can help improve teaching and learning by providing high quality information about where kids are and how students ought to be performing. There, as you can well imagine, there are 3 points to this triangle, so I'm just going to talk about the first one here. That's our summative assessment. Our summative assessment is the accountability assessment. It's what will be used at the end of the year to gauge how students have progressed during that year. It will be used for growth measures. It is a measure of college and career readiness, or as students are progressing towards college and career readiness. And it uses both a computer adaptive portion and a performance task portion. So the end of the year test is a combination of those two. The second point on the triangle is the interim assessment system. The interim assessment system draws from a pool of test questions, a pool of items that's exactly the same as the pool of test questions from the summative. Now, the items themselves aren't exactly the same, but I think you all understand that they are essentially equivalent item pools. The biggest difference is that the interim pool is a public pool. It's non-secure. We don't have to keep it secret. It's not used for accountability. Teachers can look at the items. Students can look at these items. They can see the kinds of expectations that are expected of students. Students can see what's expected of them. Once a student performs on an item and it's scored, students can see how their answer may have fallen short of what was an expected answer. And in a way, we unmask, we remove the mystery from this summative end-of-the-year test. And we think that's a great advantage, to have students and teachers and parents and building administrators all understand what this summative test is all about. You know, it is used for accountability, that summative test, that thing at the top of the triangle. We do have to keep it secure. We do have to worry about the integrity of the assessment and the integrity of the results. But that doesn't mean that we can't pull back the curtain and let people see what is actually going on with that assessment through the interim system, which reveals essentially parallel items in a parallel item set. And finally is the formative resources. This is a three-legged stool here, and without the third leg of any of these three legs, the stool doesn't work. And formative tools and resources are not formative tests from our perspective. We're not going to be developing complex formative assessments, but what we will be doing is providing teachers with resources and tools to improve their skills at giving better assessments in their classroom on a day-to-day basis. Better assessments for the end of chapter tests in whatever textbook they're using. Better assessment practices as they move through material and check for understanding. There actually is a way to get better at doing this, and most teachers don't know how to do that, quite frankly, and that's because most teacher prep programs don't expect that of students as they're preparing to become teachers. So we feel that we can help by filling that gap. So let's take a look at the next slide. I'm just going to summarize this summative assessment thing, and you can see by the graphic up at the top there that that's the little checkbox that we're on. First of all, there's two portions. It's the computer adaptive portion, or the CAT portion, and the performance task portion. The CAT uses a solid technology. We will assess the full breadth and depth of the Common Core with our CAT and provide very precise assessment of all students. You know, the way a CAT works is when a student sits down to the test, it asks a question, and if the student gets it right, it's going to ask a more challenging question. And if the student gets that first question wrong, it will ask a less challenging question. And so the software that delivers the test to the student is constantly monitoring how the student is performing and is asking questions that help the software better understand where the student is on the learning continuum. And so the CAT, as you can imagine, is very efficient. And also for our struggling students, think of this for a minute, for our struggling students, it asks questions that are targeted at the performance level of that struggling student. This is something a regular paper and pencil test does not do. Also for our advanced students, it targets the questions that are at the level of performance of that advanced student. That's also something our current tests don't do. And so the adaptive test, an advantage of the adaptive test is it gives very accurate measurement for all students and not just for those few students that are in the middle of the distribution. But I also mentioned that we have performance tests on this summative assessment. They do get into deeper learning. They are thematic or scenario-based. They provide real-world scenarios to students. And the scores on the performance task are combined with the scores in the computer adaptive portion to come up with the total overall score for the student. And that is that when we do set performance standards and we do set cut scores on this, we'll be bringing together K-12 representatives, business representatives, higher education representatives, policymakers from across the public education spectrum. And we'll be starting as a basis for that a broad description of what we call achievement level descriptors, or ALDs. These achievement level descriptors are actually being developed in draft form, in very early draft form, the first week of next month. We will then have about a 4 to 5 month open window of opportunity for comment, not unlike was the case with the Common Core state standards. And so please keep your eyes open for information about that availability to comment on it. We'll also be field testing, including in our field testing PISA items, TIMS items, NAEP items, so that we can get some external calibration, and also be looking at longitudinal data systems from our state systems to kind of triangulate the data. You know, we will, through those longitudinal data systems, for example, know how students in 11th grade performed in geometry class, and then we'll be able to look at how they performed on our assessment on the geometry items. And we'll also know in the past for how students who got good grades in geometry, how they ended up doing in college. So we can begin to get some detail painted in to this this kind of blank slate here.
We have two questions on this slide. If I could ask them really quick, is the CAT timed? Are there time limits to answer questions?
As is the case with, I think, all, if not essentially all current state tests, these will be untimed tests, but we will, through our extensive field testing, we will be able to gauge about how long it takes for most students who are meaningfully engaged to complete. And so kind of a general rule of thumb is you try to design these tests so that they occur in test sessions, if you will, blocks of time that we tell our schools about how long they should set aside for these tests. And those test sessions generally work for about 95% of the students. There's always a few students who need a little bit extra time. And it's as you all know, because you're out in the schools and you've been doing this for years as well, it's a frustrating juggling act to go between, do I keep everybody sitting in the room until every single student is done, or do I let 24 of the 25 students go because there's one student that still is working, and so forth and so on. We're going to have those same challenges with this test, but the CAT is not a timed test. It is an untimed test.
And one other question on the, is there a difference between technology-enhanced test items and technology-enabled test items?
Sure, it's a minor difference. The technology-enabled items are items that use technology for the presentation of materials to students, but do not require the students to use the technology to respond. See, I get confused myself. I know the difference between them. I always forget.
Technology enabled.
The other one, I'll say, is something that requires students to actually manipulate data. So there may be, if you click the mouse on something, features of the item change, and then you can, you're asked to fill in a data table or something like that. So it's a minor difference. We've come to call all of it technology enhanced, and realized we're confusing everybody, including myself, on this fine distinction. And so I don't think the students actually will notice the distinction. It's more of a design difference to tell our item developers.
Great. Thank you so much.
That's all right. So let's move on and talk about the interim assessments for a second. These are flexible. I already said they were non-secure. Whether or not your school gives them, teachers in your school give them, is your choice. Or your district's choice. But it's not going to be a Smarter Balanced choice. This is something that's a locally decided fact. And also, it comes with a piece of software that builds the test for you. So if you decide that come early January, you want all of the students in your 5th grade to be exposed to the problem-solving questions in mathematics, you can request that, and then it will build the test for you, drawing from that subset of the items. So really, you can build the test yourself, but it's a pretty big pool of items, so we're not asking you to go out there and one by one select the items. But we are saying that if you want to choose a standard or choose a cluster of standards, you can do that, and it will build the test for you. Talks about supporting proficiency-based instruction. I think you can well see how a design like this could, particularly in the upper grades, be supportive of schools or districts that want to start monitoring learning across the course of the year with regard to as students develop proficiency and move through their learning. And then finally, it's very authentic in that it mirrors the summative assessment, provides the full kinds of items, uses the same scale as the summative assessment, so that if you give a test, as I just mentioned, on problem solving, how students did would be reported back to you on the same scale as the end of the year test. So you can see relative to the test how they're doing. And it also includes performance assessments. And so not only is it the CAT version, but also the performance tests.
Joe, on this slide, what is the level of detail and reporting for the summative assessment versus like standard level, clustered, etc.?
That's a great question, and one that we're taking a careful look at ourselves. Certainly, accountability decisions, like percent meeting standard and so forth and so on, is going to be at what we call the composite level. So a total English language arts score or a total math score will be used for accountability for districts, for schools, for in some cases across the country, teachers, and those are scores at the aggregate level. At the individual student level, we will be reporting some level of detail that goes inside just that composite score. So in English language arts, it's certainly going to be at least reading and writing. It might be more detailed than that. So that's kind of, you caught me right where we are right now. But an advantage to the CAT, think about this for a second. On a regular test, kind of what we call a fixed form test, you get the questions you have. And so if there's a really challenging question that uses a deep level of depth of knowledge, for example, that's about, I don't know, solving a particular math problem or responding to a complex piece of reading, there might be one or two questions of that type on the assessment. And so when you get back an item response summary from that test for your classroom, all you know is how kids did on that particular item. But with an adaptive test, there are hundreds of those items out there in the item pool. And not only do we know how your students did in your classroom or in your elementary school on the items that they saw, we also have information that's in the items that they never saw. Because if you're in a low-performing school, there are very difficult items on this test that your students never saw, never got to. And we should report that to you as well. As a matter of fact, schools that are performing well, that are high-performing schools, will have a profile of the kinds of items that those kids see. And your task is not only to look retrospectively at what your kids did, but also to look at what's the profile of test questions that I think my kids should be seeing. And then you can go out to the interim bank and draw some of those questions and expose your kids to them so that they can meet that challenge. So the reporting system for this computer adaptive and performance task assessment system is going to be extremely sophisticated and really have an opportunity to, as I said in that early slide about that triangle, that first triangle, we think quality information can help improve teaching and learning.
Can I just ask one last question, and that is, are these interim assessments that you've laid out here part of the whole overall assessment package, or are they a separate purchase for districts?
In our original proposal to the department, we had to price them separately because the interim and the formative are not part of what the department asked for. We think it makes a complete system. We think our charge is to build an assessment system, not just a bundle of tests. But we had to price them separately. And so as we get a little bit further into the fall and tighten up some of our definitions of our designs, we're going to be repricing our entire system. And we do need to give states the opportunity not to subscribe to the whole system if they don't want to. And we're currently entertaining the idea that a state could, as a state, not sponsor the entire system, but allow individual school districts to sign up for it. So, if there's a large urban district or whatever, they could sign up for it. That would be a model not unlike the way the world is currently put together, where states have state tests, but many districts across our country also have interim systems that they're paying for on their own, using their own resources. And maybe using products from different publishers and so forth and so on. It's very rare for that to be a state adoption, although it does happen in a few places. The most common implementation is individual districts paying for these individual interim and formative systems on their own. And so that may end up being the way this thing is implemented.
Great, thank you.
So we need to move on in the interest of time, or we're not going to be able to get to the end. So I'm just going to fly through this slide because I think I've said most of this. Get faster results with fewer items. It does provide the deeper analysis. I already discussed that about reports for classrooms and schools, drawing on the full range of items. Increased precision, I already addressed that. It's tailored to each student. These CAT tests, the computer adaptive test, really improves security. Because the pool of items for Smarter Balanced will be about almost 40,000 items. So if as a teacher you want to go out and memorize those items so you can teach them to your kids in the hopes that they'll do better on the test, well, you go right ahead and you do that. And I don't think you'll be successful with that strategy. And so, and because every student sees essentially a unique test, it really helps us on the security side. And this is a mature technology. This is not a brand new thing. The reason why most states don't do this is it's pretty darn expensive to do. But we have the advantage of a really very generous grant from the Department of Education, and we intend to take advantage of that and do the development necessary so states can draw upon this great resource. This summary of the formative, again, they're tools and materials. They will be aligned to the Common Core. They can be used both for in-service and pre-service. Really, we want to provide the best resources possible. We're going to be drawing upon leadership in all of our states to help us with that, building a professional social networking site that people can do professional development with colleagues that are in like and similar situations, and also provide tools for teachers to evaluate the end-of-chapter tests in the textbooks that they're currently using. Because quite frankly, many of those end-of-chapter tests do not ask students to think in a more deep and challenging way, and it's probably contributing to some of the kind of shallow responses that students have come to get into the habit of responding. So the last slide in this set is a graphic that many of you may have seen before because it was developed by the K-12 Center at ETS. It's a non-profit spinoff for ETS that is committed to helping move forward understanding of the various assessment consortia. And it's just a graphic way of looking at it. You'll notice that the end of the year test, the summative, occurs in the last 12 weeks of whatever your school year is. And so you take the last day of the school, count back 12 weeks, that's when your testing window opens. It's a performance test component and a computer adaptive test component. There is a retake option on the computer adaptive test for kids or teachers who don't think that the results that were returned were all that accurate. Results will be returned on the computer adaptive test instantaneously and on the whole summative assessment within 2 weeks of the completion of the computer adaptive portion. And then those optional interim assessments are outlined there as well. But see if there are any major questions from the previous set.
Okay, Joe, as you can imagine, there are, of course. Here is the first one. Which grade levels are the interim items being created for?
Interim items are being created for 3 through 11 with some, at the third grade level, using the Common Core state standards in third grade, creating relatively easy items of those grade level standards, and in 11th grade, relatively challenging items in those grade levels as well. We are also filling the 9th and 10th grade gap with some items, but those of you, this is an elementary school principals group, so I won't spend a lot of time here, but the high school standards are not broken out by grade level. They're broken out by themes, and so of course we are building items that are appropriate for 9, 10, and 11. But we are not building a K1 or 2 items for the interim set.
Second question, will our young students need to have typing skills?
Yes.
Okay.
And let me just add that one of our states uses has the online assessment system for their assessment of second language students. So this is the test that all students who are not English proficient need to take. It's the federal requirement that all such students need to be assessed each year. And so many of those students are brand new to school, brand new to the country. And this state administers that test using computer with kindergartners. So think of this. They have kindergartners who do not speak English. Many of them have never been to any school before, much less a school in America, and they're taking the English language proficiency test online without difficulty. And they have validated those results against a paper and pencil version. And so the issue of keyboarding skills and so forth and so on quite often is at least as much an adult problem as it is a kid problem, maybe even more. And so we are doing 2 rounds of intense field testing and piloting of our system. And some of these question areas that are like, I wonder if kids can do that kinds of areas, are part of our research agenda as we go through piloting and field testing.
Have you thought about if there's going to be a requirement for words per minute or how proficient a student's typing skills have to be?
No, but remember that notion that I spoke to earlier of the kind of the 95% completion rate. So those are the kinds of things we are keeping track of. How long is it taking students to respond to each item, so that we can then calibrate that and build that into our time estimates with regard to, well, how many sessions is this going to take? How many, how many items is it reasonable to expose students to, and so on.
Last question: how many times each year will the assessment happen for each student, or do you know?
Well, the summative assessment is scheduled to occur once at the end of the year, and that retake option is really not like everybody who didn't pass can retake it, although, obviously we can't police that. But the idea is a fairness question. These tests do have high stakes associated with them, and we want to make sure that we have accurate scores for everybody. So, there's always illnesses, there's always things go wrong, the lights went out, the fire alarm went off, those kinds of annoyances. And so we do want to make sure that there's an opportunity for a second measure if folks feel that that's required.
Now, one last question. Do you know if the kindergarten test is administered verbally, or is that?
Students respond using a keyboard, and it's, the English language proficiency exams are required to measure in 4 domains: speaking, listening, reading, and writing.
Great, thank you.
Just a couple of words I want to say about engagement, really only 2 slides, one on K-12, one on higher ed. So first of all, we have been engaging with our states, and the states have been working with district leads on implementing the Common Core. Smarter Balanced has been working with selected teachers and faculty members from higher ed to write and review our items and our tasks. So about half of our item writers come from our contractors, and about half come from your ranks. We're also establishing later this fall, an education leadership team in every one of our states. That'll be about 100 teachers per state that will come together and help guide certainly our formative assessment work, but also give us advice with regard to review and reviewing the score reports, making sure they're the kinds of things that you like to see, you want to see, that will help. Evaluation of our formative assessment practices and curriculum tools will be an outreach that we will engage with teachers in your buildings. And finally, calling upon teachers to score portions of our interim and summative assessments, both for validation, to validate machine scoring when we do call upon machine scoring, but also to provide reliability tests for those few items that need to be hand scored. Why don't we move to the next slide and talk about higher education. We involved an awful lot of higher education institutions in our original proposal, and they represented about 3/4 of the students who matriculate out of high school and onto college and university. So we got good representation there. We do have 2 higher education representatives on our executive committee, and then we have a higher education lead in each state, and faculty participating in content work groups. For example, our item writing work group, our performance task work group, our bias and sensitivity work group, and so forth and so on. And the goal, as I said at the very outset, in case you didn't pick it up at that point, the goal is to make sure that students who perform well enough on the high school test will be able to enter credit-bearing courses when they go into college or university without remediation. So they will not have to take remedial courses in their first year of college. This will mean a lot to parents and parents' pocketbooks. It'll also mean a lot to students. They'll actually be able to finish college hopefully in 4 years and not 5 or maybe 6. And hopefully it'll help reduce some of the college dropout rate, which is something that's a real challenge for us now. Just want everybody to know that what we will be assessing is described in something we call claims. Assessment claims are what are we going to be saying about students? What's the claim we're making about kids? And so our overall English language arts score will be based on 4 separate claims. There'll be a reading claim, a writing claim, a speaking and listening claim, and a research and inquiry claim. So every item on the Smarter Balanced Assessment addresses one of these 4 claims. And if it doesn't, if we write an item, no matter how good the item is, if it doesn't link to one of these 4 claims, we don't have it on the test. And so you can be assured that as you look through the Common Core State Standards, where you find reading, writing, speaking, listening, and research and inquiry, that's going to be on the Smarter Balanced test. When we say we assess the full breadth and depth of Common Core, this is exactly what we're talking about. The next slide talks about the same thing for math. There are the overall claims, if you will, the big composite score, and then there are four claims that cause the design of items. Concepts and procedures is the stuff of mathematics. Those are the things you learn in math. And then we picked out 3 of the kind of overarching practices that we thought were important enough to guide our overall principles. Problem solving, which are well-posed problems that really have a clear pathway towards a solution. Students' capacity to communicate their reasoning, to explain how they got an answer, or explain the reasoning, either accurate reasoning or faulty reasoning of someone else. And finally, modeling and data analysis, which is kind of like more complex problem solving. It is solving problems but using data that's a little bit messier, a little bit more real life, and calls upon them to make mathematical models and apply those models to the data that they're provided. So I think the next one is something that is always of interest. I never know where to put this slide. I never know where its home is, so it's right here. And that is, if you are in a school and you want to buy some new equipment, what does the new equipment need to look like so that you can run the Smarter Balanced test? So this is a technology guideline for new purchases. Now this is not the whole story, because you also have the question of, well, what about that, that Apple IIe you've got back in the closet there? Is that going to work as well? So I'm not going to answer that question right now, but for the new purchases question, if you have a system that runs at this level, that new piece of equipment that you maybe just bought this summer, or maybe at the, over the course of the year, you might be acquiring some equipment, or hopefully, if you're lucky, your PTA is kicking in a little bit. These are the kind of requirements you will need. Obviously, those of us on the phone aren't necessarily the best equipped to answer these kinds of questions, and we all have IT people who help us with that, but I wanted to put that out for you. The second question with regard to what about the computers you currently have on the floor is a question that will be answered in a few months once we get further into writing the software that actually delivers our test questions, and we can have a better understanding of what those needs are. I promised a timeline that will show where things happen, and let's take this sort of one row at a time, if you will. The colored row is our years. These are school years. I'm going to start with the row that's just below the colored row. You'll see IT readiness. We have a collaborative effort with PARC to do a survey of all the schools in our consortium, and PARC with all the schools in their consortium, about what are your current computer capacity and what are your needs. And so there will be reports that come out of that system, and these are scheduled dates for IT readiness gap analyses. So these will tell you where you are, and are you closing the gap with regard to being equipment and internet ready to deliver these assessments. I'm going to now go just above the bar, and we see it says item task writing begins. So we have begun writing items, and the state educator teams have also will be beginning this fall. And then down below that, you see it says cognitive labs and field trials and pilot of 10,000 items. So we will we are conducting right now lab experiments with students and field trials on some of those more complex technology questions about, items that are kind of new items and how do students respond to them. And this spring, starting in February, we will be piloting our first round of 10,000 items. Look at the very top row, all call for pilot testing. We want to invite every classroom in the consortium who wants to participate in the pilot to go ahead and participate. And so soon, you in schools will be hearing from your school district assessment coordinator or whoever at your district level coordinates your testing program, a request asking you if you want to participate in the pilot. And that individual will be getting a notice from us through the state office. So we're going to cascade from the state office down to your district and the district down to your school, just letting people know the invitations are open. Fill out this email form and send it back, and we'll make sure that you get the opportunity to participate. A little bit to the right in the dead center in the middle in the top row is all call for field testing. And a full year from now, that will happen, and that will lead up to the field testing of our 37 item pool, the full set of items in the Smarter Balanced pool. And then moving further to the right, the interim and formative materials will be available at the beginning of the 14-15 school year, and then we will be verifying our performance standards after we give it for the first time with the operational summative assessment in 14-15. So that's a quick march through our timeline, and this of course is not all of the elements in it, but these are the ones that probably are most impactful for you all. So we have a few minutes left. I want to give you some recent news. We're about to release some items publicly to you, and so this is a quick march through our item development process. Second to last bullet is October 8th, which is when we will make our sample items available, and then in February we will be doing our pilot test of our first 10,000 items. The purpose of these sample items are to illustrate the kind of items and the kind of complexity students will be facing in English language arts and math. We want to give a signal to you all and your teachers about the kinds of shifts in instruction that will be necessary for students to succeed on this work. And we want to showcase all of our item types, showcase our selected response items, our constructed response items, our technology enhanced items, and our performance tasks. This will be available to you through a online simulated test platform, so it'll look and behave like a test. These next two bullets are pretty exciting for us. We have designed this so that if you want to select a grade band, you can. So you can look only at the released items, for example, in grades 3 through 5. Or if you want to only look at the reading items or only the problem-solving items in math, you can look at it by content claim. Or if you're really interested in those technology-enhanced items, you can select item type and select those kinds of items. Or you can select themes like learning across the grades. You know, there are some concepts that are kind of the same concept, but they move across grades so they get more sophisticated. Or difficulty progressions. Within a grade, we could have the same concept, but assessed at different levels of difficulty because students on the CAT will be at different levels of performance. And we have examples of that. In addition to that, every item and every task on the release set will display its grade level that it's written for, the Smarter Balanced claim, and the assessment target that it aligns to. In addition to that, the alignment to the Common Core State Standards, which Common Core State Standard it aligns to. A brief description of the item or the task, sort of a 1 or 2 sentence description. And then finally, for those that require multi-level scoring, like a 0, 1, 2 item, a multiple point item, the scoring rubrics, the scoring guides that will tell you how we intend to score that item. Selected response items and technology enhanced items are actually machine scoreable, and most of those are actually scored as you take the test. And there's, for every item and every task, there's a hot button that allows you to provide us feedback on how you think that item performs, ask us a question about it, or make a comment about it. And there will be online support available for the first month after the release. That'll remind you to plug in your computer, but also guide you through the website if you're having difficulty. One caveat is that this new set of released items, because it's so early in our development, will not have accessibility or accommodations tools built into it. So things such as expanding the font size, highlighting text, I don't know, screen scrollers that help the student keep track of their place as they're reading along, you know, like a line that moves down the text as the student reads, translations, so forth and so on, will not be available on this release set. We're really providing examples of released items themselves and not of the full array of accessibility and accommodations that will be coming forward. Our Director of Support for Underrepresented Students, that's Dr. Chia, is working closely with an accessibility and accommodations work group that we have and 2 special advisory committees, one working with students with disabilities, and that's chaired by Martha Thurlow. Many of you may know Martha at the National Center for Educational Outcomes, and the English Language Learners Advisory Committee that's co-chaired by Jamala Bedi from UC Davis and Kenji Hikuda, who's at Stanford. So Magda is working with all of those groups to develop a comprehensive set of accessibility and accommodations for students who have special needs. Last slide, I think, in the show is where our website is. Many questions can be answered for you here. Up at the very top, you'll see a Contact Us button. And if you want to just click on that button, you can send us an email. But also, essentially everything I've talked about today is in this website, and it's a very resourceful and rich area for you to kind of walk through. That black bar across the top, if you click any one of those, it takes you to a place, but also if you hover over any one of those, it pulls a drop down that can take you to more specific details. In addition to that, the timeline on the right, that rainbow colored thing in blues and greens, clicks on a particular year. You can go to any year, see what's going on that year, what the sequence of events, and what our timeline currently looks like. So I invite you to go to the website and learn more about us and stay engaged. If you get emails about Smarter Balanced, be sure you can respond to them and pass the good word on to your teachers about the exciting stuff that's coming forward.
We'd like to ask a few more questions here. First of all, Joe, will educator leadership teams include principals?
Yes, thank you for the question. I'm glad I got that one in before the 2 o'clock mark. So it is educator leadership teams, not teacher leadership teams. So we do want building administrators. We also want curriculum leaders from around districts. So it's, so it's a team in the state who, in a way, is the implementation team out in the field. So we do want a broad array of educators from within the state.
That's wonderful. Once the assessments are developed, where can people find them? Will they be off the Smarter Balanced website or where?
Yes, and the sample released items will be right on this page, and it will be prominent on this page. More than likely, where it says latest news on the screen we're looking at right now, it'll be the top item right there.
Great. What would you say are the options for poor districts that cannot afford to buy enough machines? What if we only have enough for some students at a time? What's your advice?
A couple of things. One is Smarter Balanced does support, will be supporting paper and pencil options for the first 3 years of its existence. Now that does not mean that entire states can choose paper and pencil, but what it does mean is that we will support those places where it's just not quite possible yet. But we do think that even in some of our least resourced schools, they'll be able to have some level of engagement online. The proportion of computers to students across schools is not, infinity to zero kind of a thing. And so maybe it's the case that in an elementary school you've got enough computers that your 5th graders could do math this year. Okay, get started with it. Also, you don't need one computer for every student. These can be administered over that long window. That's a 12-week window, and students can go in waves or in groups into either a lab setting or into a library where you may have several computers set up and students can cycle through. So everybody does not have to be taking the test at exactly the same time the way we typically do with paper and pencil tests.
Great. How will we access the sample questions? Will people receive an email to know when they're available, or do they just have to keep checking back here?
We are about a week before we go live. We will be sending information out to our state assessment leads, and that it will include rollout recommendations and suggestions to get the word out to districts and to schools. And again, right now our target date is the 8th of October. So if on the 8th, if you go to our website, I think you'll find it.
Lastly, on this slide here, you mentioned grade bands 3 to 5, 6 to 8. The question came in, is there a kindergarten to 2nd grade level test? Will there be items released for their test?
No. Remember, this assessment grant that was provided by the U.S. Department of Education was to fulfill the No Child Left Behind accountability requirements. And so that does require assessment at grades 3 through 8 and at least 1 year in high school. So our assessment program begins at 3rd grade.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. I think our time is up. If there are any other questions, I would encourage you to contact Joe or any of his staff at Smarter Balanced. Thank you, Joe, so much. On behalf of NAESP, thank you so much for your time and expertise. I know you're a very busy man, but we do certainly appreciate this.
You're welcome. Look, I think I hope I covered the topics, and I had a good time doing it. Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Joe.